But the verbiage in that moratorium that was in place, Scott, was based on New York State DEC giving the permit to the town to pursue that. I understand what you're saying.
The verbiage in that was after we got, not to get the pump test approved, but to get the findings from the pump test.
No,
Right.
I think it was the permit for the 72.
I might have a copy of the moratorium. I mean, it's kind of a moot point, other than you're saying
Wasn't
you
it
don't
for
understand why we're doing
The
it.
result? That was my understanding, because we needed that information to move forward.
Okay, so if I can find,
In order to get the results, get a permit for the well.
Right, but it wasn't, it didn't end at the time of the permit. It ended at the time the DEC issued a permit for the well, which would mean they'd have to do the pump test, get the findings from that, and issue the permit for the well, for us to use it to pump water. It wasn't a permit for the 72-hour pump test, it was a permit for the well itself, right?
Yes.
I'm trying to find the exact verbiage, so that way.
And then there's some stuff, the 74 pump down test is after the well is in. So we gotta get.
No, the result after the well's in, when they issue their permit for us.
Okay, if you want, can I read this? This is from, hopefully I've got the right document. It was apparently at the regular town board meeting of August 24th, 2021, section 6, term. This moratorium imposed by this local law shall be in effect for a period of 1 year until the town of Sterling, or until the town of Sterling obtains a water withdrawal permit from the New York State DEC for a new public for a new public water supply well to be drilled adjacent to the village of Fairhaven's well field, whichever occurs first. So that's the verbiage.
Right, but in order to get, the DEC doesn't issue the permit for the well until after, they need the 72-hour pump test results to issue the permit for the well, for us to use.
I thought the well was drilled, and then they did the 72.
You have to drill the well, but
But
you
it
drill,
doesn't count as the well.
no, they don't, you drill the well, you do the testing on it, turn that into the DEC, then the DEC issues the permit to use,
Approves that.
approves the well, right?
As a well.
Yeah. So it's not,
That's the way I understand it too.
it's not to get the permit to do the test, to test it, it's the permit after they get the results.
I think that's,
And
I
that's
thought
why-
that's what I just read, but, okay.
You just read to get the permit, the DEC issues a permit for the use of the well,
Okay,
not for the testing of the well. The testing has to be done beforehand. The reason the moratorium was wrote that way was so that we would get information from the well to use going forward on land use restrictions or anything going forward. This here is just basically saying that we're gonna have a moratorium until the zoning thing's out, but there's nothing that says, you know, this is basically just prohibiting anybody from using their property to withdraw water until the zoning commission and the town board approves the zoning, land use regulations change. Or 1 year.
so my take on that. If the town were issued a DEC permit, in theory, it could have happened this summer. In theory, it could have. Then the moratorium would be up. Since that moratorium from last August was put in place, the town board in February tasked the zoning commission was working on a draft wellhead, local law for a wellhead protection overlay district. And the intent of the new moratorium is to make the moratorium contingent upon, until the town adopts the wellhead
I
protection
understand
overlay.
that, but I guess
Right,
I don't
or-
want, I mean, Steve Wakely presented you with the initial land use regulation in February. At that time, you told me
And
this should be ready, you know, that the existing moratorium, when, you know, they're not gonna get the permit for the well until, they won't even drill it probably now until next summer.
but that was
Earliest.
unknown
Right, what I'm saying,
earlier
well,
this year. And
no,
my-
it was- it
for
was
me,
never-
it was unknown for me, let's put it that way.
they,
Scott.
C280 had said right along that it wouldn't be till, once it got past, you know, February or March, and we didn't have the application for the
Right.
proposal, that it wouldn't be till next summer.
Right, so,
That's what I said all along.
so is your concern,
My concern is that this affects a lot of people. With this broad scope of bulk water extraction, this affects a lot of people. It affects anybody that tries to sell water to fill wells like Mert Mahoney used to do. It affects a lot of people. There's a lot of people in this town that need to buy water to put in their wells to do it. It doesn't just affect Mr. Huntress and whatever he plans on doing. I still believe, and I think it's still law that whatever property you own what's underneath it. If it's a well, everybody keeps saying Fairhaven's aquifer. Well, Fairhaven owns a part of the aquifer where their property is. Ronnie Slob owns a part of the aquifer where his farm is. The Stone Boys own a part of the aquifer where their property is. Mr. Huntress owns a large part of the aquifer where his property is. And I'm still, you know, I don't like taking away people's ability with their own property to do what they see fit. I'm all
Even
for
if-
protecting the water as far as pollution or contamination,
Right.
but I still believe that if somebody owns a piece of property, they're entitled to use what lays below it.
and my belief on that,
I got a
it's
question.
gotta be for the good
Aaron's
of the,
recording
oh,
this.
excuse me,
Yeah.
I thought I was talking.
Can this be recorded?
Excuse me, I got a question. We got, Karen is recording this, is this okay to do?
What's wrong with it?
I just asked.
I
It's a
thought this was
discussion
starting out
between
there,
the
said no
board.
video cameras.
It's not personal, excuse me, it's not the employment history of a
I'm
particular
sorry,
person,
Karen.
it's not,
I'm fine with it.
Okay,
it's,
okay.
Yeah, legally, my understanding is as long as it's not interfering with our conducting town business, then yes, people can video.
Okay, I'm fine with it, I'll say whatever I gotta say here, in
Right.
front of whoever I gotta say it
So, as I was saying, so I understand where you're coming from, but I also believe that we have to look at the potential for the aquifer, the source of water and the recharge area. And it looks like the area is delineated at about 500 acres. And that provides the water to all of the village of Fairhaven, Fairhaven Beach State Park, Water District 3, plus heading west. And I guess my concern with that is that I would say I have to look at what's good for the public and the people. I understand what you're saying.
Well, I
It's-
agree what's good for the public, but the
Right.
public includes people outside of the village of Fairhaven. The public includes people that don't live in Wayne County. That the village is using that aquifer to sell water. I mean, basically to town of Woken and to the town of Sterling. You know, you said, you think it's 500 acres, what's the village own? 14 acres? How much is there, 10 acres or something?
I think, maybe, I don't exactly say.
Yeah. But my thing is just, you know, when this started, the moratorium started, was to get the figures, to figure out how much water is actually there. Now what we're doing with this and everything is just guessing that there's not much water there. There's enough water for Fairhaven to do whatever they wanna do, but there's not enough water for anybody else that owns property on that aquifer to do what they wanna do.
Yeah.
Do you
but
have,
I-
I'm gonna ask right up front, do you have any interest Huntress.
No,
Or
why would you say that, Joe? No,
Or
I
any
don't.
any family.
No, my
members.
father rents a pole barn from him. He doesn't even rent it. He mows the lawn there or something. And this was way before any of this started happening.
Right, but
I don't have
still,
any-
right, I need to make sure
Right.
that I understand where you're coming from.
Mr. Huntress is concerned, well, what if you guys pump water to the town of Sterling and you take away from my water, which, that's a valid concern. You know, what if, you know, what if we draw water out of there and it draws Karen's well down? Or, you know, any of the other neighbors? You know, that's their water, the way I look at it.
Yeah.
You know, what if we did that when McIntyre had his bait farm there? You know,
Wait.
nobody took into consideration his business and his necessity for water
We're
when
getting,
they did what they did.
but we have more information now than we did in the
Maybe
past.
maybe-
I had, well, I've got to look to a hydrogeologist, Steve Winkley. Ed Henchy did a presentation, so I looked to those.
Why don't you look to HSA or any of those?
Well, I did read their report, and I will tell you, my first reaction when I saw that expanded watershed, I'm like, what? That, it's like over 5 miles in length, and they wanted to include that, speculating
And
that it would be 2,300 gallons a minute. To me, it looked like they were trying to skew, to make it look like potentially the aquifer could provide a lot more water than perhaps, and the data's
And
not there that we know.
I mean, everybody local's been told that for as long as I can remember, that there's a lot more water there than.
Okay, and I had a local well driller, I won't mention a name, say to me that it's like an underground river,
Yep.
and that's false information, according to the hydrogeologist.
According to who, well driller or
The
according to
hy- the well driller told me, and again, it's hearsay
Yeah.
to anyone else, but I was having a conversation with the well driller and said, and I had someone else, and it might have been the same, I think it was the same well driller, that suggested the water source is Lake Skinny Atlas.
I heard
And-
the same thing.
I've
And
heard the
in
same
that
thing
sense-
for-
That's false, according to the hydrogeologist.
That's your opinion that it's false.
It's
I mean,
not
there's
my
other people-
opinion, I'm
Well, there's other
paraphrasing.
people that, I mean,
Right,
we don't know if it's false, that's what the test is for.
right.
That's what I'm thinking here. We're worried about a lot of things, obviously,
Yeah.
and rightfully so. I mean, number one, we need to take care of our residents, both the village and the town of Sterling. And until we do that pump down test, we lack a lot of information. We really do.
Right, but that's why I'm wondering
Capacity.
why originally it was until we had the information, when we were issued the permit. And the reasoning back then was when, once we got that permit, we'd have all that information. And now all that information's mute, that we're gonna make a land use regulation without having that information.
Right.
Because you're planning on, I mean, Steve Winkley's given his recommendation, everything, we're planning on presenting a land use regulation change before we get the information from that test. And I wanna know where it went, that now all of a sudden we can make this without getting the proof
A part of what
from that.
my belief is that Steve Winkley believes he has enough data that he could support what he's put out there now, today. And that's what he has said.
But my thing is anybody's mind gonna change if, when the results come back from the 72-hour pump down test, it's any different? I think everybody's mind's made up, and that if they did come back and say, no, it is an underground river, yes, the capacity is 2,300 gallons a minute or whatever, that still isn't gonna change anybody's take on this. We're gonna deprive people of the use of the property. And I'm not talking solely about Mr. Huntress.
Maybe or maybe not. It may redirect us into the recharge area.
Thank you,
May redirect us into the quantity of the aquifer
thank you.
and what's gonna change the quality of it in the future as far as property around the well field area, what we need to maintain around that well field.
Right, so if we move forward with what's presented, then Steve Winkley's way off.
No.
But I think may change his mind too, if something shows differently in that 72-hour pump down test. I mean, there's a lot dependent on that test. I mean, it'll be a true test of
Right.
where the recharge area is actually coming from, where the aquifer actually is, underground river, be there or not, all kinds of information
Right,
will
but
come
that's-
from that test.
We've already decided, because Steve Winkley told us that the aquifer is this big. If we find out the HSA's right, and it's this big,
Right.
then here we are, this big. You know,
I think we'll have more facts after
Right.
the drawdown test instead of speculation.
I have a question about the timeline. I know, so this moratorium basically says the same thing as the other one did, except for the deadlines, correct? This one is talking about the
Yeah,
aquifer protection.
right.
And then the other one was talking about the 72-hour drawdown test. But the other one, we already extended, and we know that it's, the 72-hour test is going to be done probably next summer, beyond the date of that.
When does that one expire?
That way it's 6
It was
months.
enacted in
Didn't we-
September, so extended it 6 months, so it'll be from there.
So then,
February.
February, so we know that that one is going to expire before the drawdown test is gonna be done.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and so this one, if we say,
Could be extended.
what?
It could be extended.
No, it's not. Well, we have to re-vote on it,
Oh, right.
but do it at that time.
We have to
Right,
redo.
right.
So, if we waited and worked with, if the zoning commission, or, yes, I'm saying backwards, if they wanted to, if we wanted to put a pause on the aquifer protection plan until the results were done from the moratorium, so that would be, so, not the drawdown test, then we would have all the data, the one that, the data we already have, the data from the test, then we can wrap everything together and put it in the aquifer protection plan. Then that would make, to me, it seems like the logical.
So what's the new, okay, so the new one, if we passed it tonight, it's gonna expire the 23rd of, what's the date? The 25th of July, 2023.
Or,
Probably about the time they're putting the well in.
or until,
No, it's 1 year, whichever comes first. Correct?
That's what I read.
Yeah, so 1 year from today, it would expire. And if we don't have the zoning law passed, then which I would think the zoning, the land use regulation should be done by February, I would think. If it's not, at that time, look at extending it with a moratorium, not now. Because it already started last meeting. You've got everybody, well, why aren't we including Dollar General in this? What, you know, why wasn't it included in the moratorium, and that happened after the last time? We passed the last one. Why wasn't, it should have been put in that you can't put any retail stores in. It was brought up the other night that it should have been in there. So what happens, we pass this, and then 2 months down the road, here we go changing it again because we're talking about changing it again because it didn't include everything in it.
well,
I've said my piece, I don't understand it, it's here, it's in front of us. I've spoke my feelings on it, I spoke my feelings on it before.
What's the difference to what we got now and then this year? Is
When
it
it expires.
just when it
No.
expires?
And
No.
when, what else is different in it between this one and the other one, except for the time?
What it's contingent upon, so
Right.
the
What makes it expire?
Wellhead Protection Overlay District that we've been working on actually will be a separate column in the table, the usage table, in the land use regulations. And, within that approximately 500 acres, which would be the, basically the aquifer recharge area, the well recharge,
Yeah.
aquifer recharge area. And we have looked at not just bulk water extraction, obviously we are, the bigger issue, the broader issue would be contaminants, potential contaminants. And so we've spent a lot of time addressing that as a zoning commission with Steve Winkley, and how we can do it in a way that seems fair to the landowners.
What is the potential contaminants? How is that, what is that?
Well, we probably don't want a gas station on the aquifer. So again,
That's
just,
hardly unlikely.
right, but,
If you're talking about parking lot runoff,
right,
things like
Yeah.
that.
right. One of the big things would be parking lots and runoff, the potential for pollutants from that, so. What's that?
Have to close up the golf course.
No, it wouldn't be defined as in the area. It's not defined according to what Steve Winkley has proposed.
Rick, any more, you got anything else?
So I don't know how else to explain it,
No,
other
no,
than that the town, by having, working on a wildlife protection overlay district, it would be about 500 acres where the uses or activities would be more restricted. And it's not town-wide, it's specific to that area with the intent to protect the water.
Joe, I have a question.
Yeah.
You talked to Steve a lot. Did he voice any concern about what data the drawdown test would do? Does he think that any of that information would change anything that he has already provided to you?
He has said to this point in time, he's comfortable and feels that he can support what he's recommending with the data that he has to this point.
Does he
Well, I
think
think
that the option of the results of the drawdown test would change or skew
He hasn't.
anything?
I haven't picked up on that, because of what I can say, and he said it more than once, that he will stand by what he, has put out today.
I think that the monitoring of the wells around the well field will give him a better idea of where the recharge area is, how much we're drawing off that aquifer that actually affects wells around that area. You look at the layout of the land of what wells it is affecting. I'm not sure he knows exactly how far out, where he can pinpoint, say, this well drew down 12 inches. I'd be very surprised if he could do it, just in talking with him, because he's hunting for data too. I think we will, if we do it right, collect a lot of data off this drawdown test, and it should answer a lot of questions.
I believe it's a finite source of water, and I have a concern about our putting a well in another straw in that aquifer when there's the option to go with aqua on a dog
This,
county
what,
water.
okay, what's this gonna do as far as the town putting a well there? This has, is the intent to keep the intent of this moratorium to keep the town from putting
No,
a well in there for the zoning?
not really. No, the intent is to protect that 500 acres. But meanwhile, as I said, I just threw in a curveball and said another argument, I feel.
Well, and that's part of my concern, is there's a secondary motive to keep the town from
could I please have privilege of the floor? Any way, any possible way?
We already passed that.
I feel I have a point.
What's the pluses of Sterling for Fairhaven, put that well in? Is there any positive things to that, do you think?
Well, it sounds like what I heard you say, Lee, is that it would be less expensive to go with Sterling having a well there than looking at another
I'm
option.
talking about the plus.
Okay.
In favor of Fairhaven, for us to put this well in there. What would that benefit them?
Benefit
Fairhaven.
Fairhaven? I don't know. Do you?
I do.
And what,
I think it's a backup for well number 1. That's the oldest well. And if that was to go down, it would be, you know, plus there's the tower, if they lost one of their water towers. I know they used to run on the smaller tower, the old tower there, and they had problems with it one time with low water, I guess it was.
Yeah, it's got
So, I say that's, and plus, they're gonna gain the revenue from the sale of the water to the town. So I think there's 3 things that favors, Sterling putting the well, that favors, potential favor for Fairhaven.
I also think you're getting better drinking water from a well versus from the lake.
Well, I'm just
No,
talking
there's a
Fairhaven,
lot of-
but I.
Yeah, well, for everybody, right? That would be for Sterling, because they're already getting theirs. Right?
Back down to
So what's the resolutions?
Well, let's do number 5 first, because if local law number 1 fails, then our supposedly local law number 2 is gonna be actually local law number 1. See what I mean?
Yeah,
So do number 5 first.
okay, can I get a resolution to pass local law number 1? Read it off.
No,
No?
no, please don't read it all. It's not necessary.
Do I legally have to read it off?
No.
No? I think I do, don't I?
Yeah, okay.
Town of Sterling local law number 1 of 2022. Temporary moratorium upon the